Right, if you get into that drum definition, I shall send you a sample of my sourdough starter.
Tell me the full story.
Right, so I quite like making bread, and I thought I'm going to try and make sourdough. And in order to make sourdough...
Because normal bread was just too easy for you.
Well, you just got to change it up, vary things, try new things. So I thought I will try and make a sourdough, and I shall make it from scratch, which involves making a sourdough starter. And a sourdough starter is a leavening thing, and it's basically just like a natural way of cultivating yeast.
I can tell you got really deep into the technical aspect of this leavening thing.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, carry on. I'll stop interrupting.
So the idea is it's a natural way of cultivating yeast, because yeast is kind of everywhere, and then it's like on the flour and stuff when you get it. So you sort of mix flour and water, and that's it, in a 1-to-1 ratio by weight, and then mix it, and then the next day you add a bit more, and then you sort of like throw some of it away and add some more, and you build it up, and over the course of a week you will create a sourdough starter, which is a live yeast culture in this flour and water thing, and it sort of like bubbles, and ostensibly it smells quite nice. Mine doesn't. And then you use that instead of using like packets of dry yeast when making your bread. You use that.
It's giving flavour as well as rising.
Because the whole process is slower, you get more complicated flavours is the idea. But yeah, what I've wrought is I don't think it's a yeast culture. I think I think the yeast got killed and has been replaced by something far worse.
So basically, what you've done is just let some flour rot. In fact, no, you've more than let it. You've encouraged it.
I have actively encouraged all kinds of hellish things to grow in this jar. So yeah, it's been thrown out. Hannah very kindly dealt with it.
You see, many a great discovery has been made this way. Penicillin for starters. Alcohol was basically for people probably accidentally eating rotten fruit. In fact, basically anything that's fermented, people probably discovered by accident. Even chocolate was probably the result of an idiot like you getting something wrong. So who knows? Maybe Hannah has thrown away a treasure. I
doubt it. I mean, you have to have no sense of smell, I think, to continue with this. You have to be...
Hello!
You have to be you. Yeah, so... I'll try again at some point soon, but yeah, it is quite horrific.
I think we should congratulate ourselves for recording on a night where it isn't absurdly hot.
It does make a nice change.
And you know what that means? Fully dressed recording!
Yay!
What more could you possibly want?
I still just want you to not tell me. I'm just like, I don't need to know.
Is it not a comfort then?
Well, because when you tell me that you're fully dressed, there's an implication there that in the past you haven't been, and in the future you won't be again. That's the bit that's the problem. Whereas if you never told me, I would just assume that every single time we're talking, we're both fully dressed.
You see, the problem is the more you say this to me, the more I'm going to bring it up, because that's just how my brain's wired. I can't help it. I have to weird people out on a regular basis. Possibly can't even help it. It might just be innate. Battlebots, episode 4, the episodening. Because I don't know how else to introduce this without follow-up. I've got no idea what I'm doing. I'm out of my depth. I'm out of my comfort zone. I don't like it.
The format is gone. Everything's ruined.
We might as well just give up. Here's a list of fights. Read them for yourselves. Watch the episode. We're done.
What a way to end. So... We are a little bit behind. Our recording schedules did not, or our personal schedules did not allow for recording episodes on time. So we are a week behind everyone. So Battlebots episode 4, last week's news today. we start with Red Devil versus Monsoon.
Can we start somewhere else?
Why?
I just want to point out that they did a really nice intro again, and I'm starting to come on board with them, actually using old footage. Something that Robot Wars really failed to do in acknowledging the past versions of itself. Really nice bit of historical context to the robots. Not trying to pretend that they all just sprung out of thin air last year. I liked it. More, please. There, I've disrupted your flow. Red Devil versus Monsoon, as you were saying, is a fight that happened.
This is the first time we've seen Monsoon. What did you think of it?
Well, is it the first time we've seen Monsoon?
It's the first time that we've seen the legal entity called Monsoon.
So, It's far from untested in terms of drive and that. It's been running as Tauron 3 for a long time at live events without the weapon. The weapon, however, was very much a surprise, even to Tom, it would appear. This thing is an absolute monster when it gets going.
Yes, it is terrifying, I have to say.
They quoted a tip speed of 242 miles per hour, which is kind of nudging up against the tip speed limit. Someone, I'm sure, will sweep in to prove me wrong, but my gut feel is that this is among the most powerful spinners at Battlebots. Because we've got lots of discs that are running quite well, but obviously a vertical bar, which seems to have a good amount of weight behind it, running at a good speed. It's got to be up there in energy.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm trying to think who might match it. Because Huge, despite being pretty big, is quite a light bar. Obviously, your Tombstone, that's a different level. Your Ice Wave, that's probably a different level as well. But there can't be that many people that are going to dish out the hits that Monsoon is.
No, I think you've probably covered you've covered the two that I had in my mind that are up there. I can't think of any others.
So yeah, Monsoon is a fresh one for this series. Red Devil, we've already seen fight once. They sort of beat a broken and smouldering Brutus in a fight that basically said nothing about what they've got this year. What they have got is the plough again, a sort of very necessary defensive approach that hasn't worked at all.
I think it worked quite well. I mean, like, they took a lot of hits. You know, we're sort of saying that Monsoon has potentially got one of the most powerful weapons here, and then Red Devil took the hits and went the distance. Like, a lot of that, I think, was through good driving and stuff. But, I mean, the plough took a lot of damage there and served to protect the squishy bits of the robot.
The issue is they've taken all of their damage in the first two hits. So that first hit completely reminds me of Nightmare's hit on Slam Job back in the Comedy Central days, one of the biggest hits you will ever see. And that's done a huge amount of damage. It's obviously bent up a huge section of the plough, but it also seems to have completely disabled the sort of lifting mechanism on that centre pod. And of course, the second hit takes out the saw, which was never going to do anything anyway unless it got a proper... if it wedged under, which it was no longer going to do with the plough as it was. So I'm not sure it has done its job. It's stopped more fragile things getting hit, but it hasn't deflected blows, it's just been broken by them. It's more ablative than anything.
Well, ablative armour is still armour.
Yeah, until it's not.
I see what you mean. I mean, I still think it was. I think it did well enough. Like, you know, for a robot that, like, I mean, everything about Red Devil is not. It's not the most sturdy looking thing. Like, just the way that's designed, it's probably more fragile than like a titanium box, for example. And I think it did really well to even though it only took a couple of hits and stuff. But I mean, it took a couple of hits and then kept going, which I think is impressive.
You did hit the nail on the head by saying that its survivability was mostly based on the driving.
Yeah.
You know, Ravi has done very well to keep that plough pointed at Monsoon. It's taken the damage on the plough, but that stops it taking it anywhere else. I accept that completely. I think they're very lucky that Monsoon's weapon has stopped working.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long Red Devil would have survived had Monsoon's weapon kept going, but yeah, fortunately for them, it became a bashy fight. Everyone's favourite.
Which doesn't exactly suit Monsoon.
No.
It's not a robot optimised in any way for shoving things around.
No. It's got a weird, like, body that keeps flipping up and stuff. It was very weird.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think has been a major change since the old version of Tauron, is that the drive power just seems to have been upped quite a lot, and it is causing that on the body. But of course, without anything to push with, power is kind of irrelevant. So I suppose it's good for manoeuvrability, good for overcoming the forces of the spinner, but it doesn't help them in situations where the weapon's not working. I suppose this is one of those times where I do another complaint about the judges as well, isn't it?
I guess so.
In fairness, this one isn't very complainy. There will be more complainy ones to come.
Perfect.
But it's another split decision. And I suppose this one I can just about see why Derek Young has given it to Red Devil. You know, he is the only actual driver on that panel of judges. So I'd imagine that he's lending a lot more weight to the sort of achievement of standing up to a robot like that using that one defensive area of your robot. So I can see him splitting damage and then giving the strategy and control over to Red Devil. So that one I can kind of see it with, but it has raised a question for me of how important is it to get a unanimous decision with the judges this season? Because of course we've got this situation where 16 robots are going to be chosen out of the field to move on to the knockout competition. And one of the factors in that is what they're calling robot ranking, which is a sort of... We don't know the details of it, but it's some kind of mathematical formulation of how successful a robot has been. And within that, knockouts seem to be scored higher than judges' decisions, and the judges' scores are also taken into account within that. So a lot of people are sort of saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter if it's a split decision, they still won it. But actually, this season, it might matter.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the judges' scoring is taken into consideration, then yeah, you wanna win by the most sort of like definitive thing possible, and a split decision is the least definitive way of winning, I think.
And of course, a fast KO is perfect. I'll actually read here the factors in this ranking. So your average number of wins, your average knockouts, the average time it takes you to achieve a knockout, the time it takes for you to get knocked out, and judges' scores. They're all factors. Although this is then only one of 8 criteria for actually selecting robots, so it probably means nothing.
Yeah, I wonder if by the end of all the calculations and decision making, actually the judges' scores is such a minor part of it that you may as well ignore it. Maybe.
But that wouldn't give me license to complain about judges' scores. I've got to find the controversy. It's how I do.
So for the purposes of this, then, the judges' scores are the most important factor in deciding which teams will go into the knockout competition.
Yep, and if Monsoon don't make it through because of this, it's all Derek Young's fault. Clearly, he has a vendetta against British machines after what Warhead did to Complete Control. He's still bitter, and he's out for blood, you know?
It's fine, we can send him my sourdough.
False accusations, the best kind. Anything else to say on that fight as we gallop through?
No.
In which case, should we move on to Lucky versus Scorpios?
Yes.
Or, as I nearly read it because of the placement of my cursor, Scorpips, which I think is a way better name.
Scorpips.
It's far more whimsical, isn't it?
Scorpips is indeed a more whimsical name.
Unfortunately, Scorpios just feels like a less refined version of Sawblaze.
Yeah.
If I saw it on its own, I'd love it, but because it's there to be compared with Sawblaze, I think Sawblaze kind of comes out on top on looks and effectiveness.
Yes, like in this fight, Scorpios had like the ideal conditions for delivering damage, and they didn't.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think. I don't know if Sawblaze would have done any better. Would it have done any more damage?
There's no way to know, I suppose, but my gut feeling is that it would. I think the Saw on Sawblaze seems to be more effective. Although it's been up against a very different opponent in Overhaul, so maybe I'm reaching here.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's hard to know. Is this Scorpios, or is this just like Saws in general are just clearly, utterly pointless for anything other than a good spectacle when you get good hits with them?
I wouldn't say that any weapon is utterly useless. I think every weapon has its chance to shine.
Yeah.
I would, however, agree that they're very much a weapon for the trailers rather than often for the fights.
Yeah.
They'll give you great shots of showers of sparks, but in fights they don't often do very much. But again, Sawblaze has kind of been the exception to that, and Red Devil to an extent, whereas Scorpios has never quite shown it. Although admittedly, one of their fights was purely them getting stuck under the screws.
Not great showing.
Lucky, meanwhile, doesn't really suffer in comparison to any other robots because it's one of only 3 or 4 flippers that we really get to see. And I don't really want to class Sub-Zero as a flipper anymore, to be honest.
Lucky, I don't understand the front of Lucky. Right? Why?
In what respect?
Well, in the they've got these wedges that are miles and miles in front of where their flipper sort of like is.
I do think this was a weird choice of wedge configuration for this fight, because they do have multiple, but this seemed like a slightly strange approach.
Yeah, like, because they just meant that they sort of seemed to really struggle to get under Scorpios, so then even when they did, they could get their wedges under it, but then their flipper was still miles away from their opponent.
I think that really is a limitation of using a 4-bar system for a flipper, though, in that you are going to end up with something where you need to get a robot quite high up on your robot before you can get the flipper engaged underneath them. That, or you have something really spatulary, but that then becomes quite flimsy.
Spatulas for the win.
Well, not next episode. Yeah, I think to have a robust flipper tip, you kind of need to have that system of something feeding onto the weapon, which would also explain why they are quite long, because obviously if they're at a steep angle, it's harder to get anything up them.
Yeah.
Their big issue this fight, I would argue, was more that their wedges were really wide, whereas Scorpios' wedges were quite narrow, very central, and it seemed to always end up that part of Scorpios' wedge would get under Lucky, and part of Lucky's wedge would get under Scorpios, and nothing really happened. Scorpios could still get his weapon engaged from there, so I suppose they kind of came out on top of that.
Yeah.
But it did lead to a lot of glancing blows in those early stages and not really that much going on.
Can you call those things that Scorpius has a wedge? I'm gonna pose to you the question: what is a wedge? Because they're just sheets of metal, basically, aren't they? Sticking out the front of Scorpius.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they technically have a very shallow angle on them leading up to the robot, potentially. So that might just get them in as a wedge. It's an interesting question, though. I'm not prepared for this.
I'm going to regret this question.
You're inviting definitions. You realise this? The thing you hate most.
I know. A couple of episodes' time, I'm going to really hate myself for doing this.
I'm going to say this might have to be follow-up for next time. I need to really give this some thought. My immediate reaction would be that wedges tend to be a single piece, and then that you've got wedgelets that are kind of a different thing. But I don't know how I feel about that yet. And then there's forks. Yeah, this is definitely follow-up for next time. Leave me with it. I will have a definitive... oh, that's a horrible way of putting it. I'll have something.
Definitive definition. Nice.
The best kind.
Well, I can tell you that the correct answer is not a wedge. That's the conclusion you need to come to.
It's definitely an edge case of a wedge at best. Before we get into the fight properly, can I just call out the graphics before the fight? The strengths and weaknesses thing.
Yeah.
It was...
That was weird.
Yeah, it was... I'm just going to go out and say amateurish looking. It looked really bad.
I think that's fair.
It's always a real danger sign for me when someone making graphics decides that italics are a good idea. Italics so rarely look good, especially on a really thick, heavy font like they're using there, with that kind of neon glow to it. It's just... No, just spend an extra 50 quid on a slightly better graphics person.
Well, I think this is just the sort of like low budget, fast turnaround bit coming through in a slightly less positive way this time.
That's fair. And again, I'm so happy with the production of this whole thing that I'm clutching at straws to criticise stuff.
Yeah, it's fine. I noticed it there a bit weird, but like, whatever.
Back to the fight then. I couldn't help feeling that Lucky did have the best of the opening exchanges here, and I'm not quite sure what the turning point really was. Was it that cut to the front left? Because I feel like that shouldn't be major damage. Was it the hits from the hammers on the side? Was it just Lucky sucking a bit? I can't tell.
I mean, me being the terrible person I am, I want to say that Lucky sucks. Because I agree. There's sort of nothing that happened screamed of big damage that should cause it to lose that much mobility. I mean, I would make the argument that it was immobile for ages and should have been counted out. But wasn't for some reason. And so
no idea how this went to the judges. No idea.
It's just insane, really. And it's sort of like I don't know what it was that did it. I guess the hammers, because hammers can do like a surprising amount of like internal damage, but I didn't think that the hammers in the arena were that powerful.
Wouldn't have thought so. And also the left side was what went, which makes me think it was potentially that attack to the front left wheel.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite able to make the leap of how that seemed to only really get through the shock mounting on the armour would actually do anything to the drive.
I wonder if when the saw was cutting, it basically just sort of bent a little spike into the wheel and just jammed the wheel from turning, maybe.
Anything's possible, I suppose.
Yeah, it'll be something really subtle and small that's just preventing that wheel from turning. And then sort of like, I think a lot of robots can carry on with one wheel missing, but not all of them can. And Lucky probably evidently depends on having all of its wheels working. So.
And of course, it could just have been start of tournament gremlins. We know they've had really short turnaround times on the build. Lots of people are having difficulties in their first fight with things that seem simple. So there's every chance that's the case here.
Yeah.
And Lucky, I think it was the same version of Lucky was at Robo Games just a few weeks later as Ziggy and did very well.
Yeah. Maybe they were just
So it's definitely not a rubbish robot as much as we might like to joke.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a very dominant win for Scorpios.
Yeah.
And again, it's another case of, is this fight going to the judges going to hamper them down the line?
Yeah, this one's if it does, this is I think more contentious for me than the Monsoon split decision, because I think Scorpius should have won a knockout.
And a fairly quick one by half distance.
Yeah, definitely. Madness.
Madness. They call it madness. Just realise that 90s or 80s Scar references probably aren't your thing.
I'm unlikely to get them. We can say that.
Anything else on that fight?
No, I don't think so.
Do you want to introduce the next one?
So up next we have Battle Royale with Cheese versus Tantrum.
Let's not kid ourselves, this was a bad fight.
Yes, it was.
Fascinating machines, but not a good fight. And I'm surprised this hasn't been relegated to Science Channel Extra.
Yeah.
I think if it weren't for the aesthetics, it probably would have been. But in an episode with some decent fights, I think there's room for a slightly silly one. You're going to disagree, aren't you?
Well,
I mean, it'd be helpful if you disagreed.
I mean, it's sort of like I'm kind of torn, because like I think if like, you know if these robots worked, or I guess more precisely if Battle Royale with Cheese worked, then it'd be fine. And then because it didn't work, the only saving thing is that it's sort of two slightly weird looking robots with dressed up teams, or at least one crazy dressed up team and stuff. And it's sort of like, is that enough to carry it? I mean, the team seemed to have a really good time, but I think it made for a pretty dull fight that wasn't great television.
I'm really torn on this, because I'm saying that they're both fascinating machines. It's for very different reasons. So in Battle Royale with Cheese, it's an artistic bot that could also pack a punch. Whereas Tantrum looks like a really competently built machine. It's really compact. It's going to do really well against spinners. It's going to take some hits. But the weapon on it, okay, it's something different. I like that. I like a spring-powered flipper. But it's pretty underwhelming weapon-wise.
Yeah.
So it's something that, you know, for the meta is a really good robot to have around, but in its own right isn't a particularly televisual machine.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Although they have got into the spirit of this fight. They've attached a spatula, which I also think is kind of a practical choice, because having a bit more reach on the flipper, had the blade been working, would have been very useful to them. Although it has also got bent down at some point and stopped the flipper retracting completely nullifying any power it had.
I don't know, man. I think making that a spatula almost turned the whole fight into a bit of a meme, almost.
Yeah, as I say, they embraced that element of it, but I think it was also a competitively useful thing to do.
I kind of wish Tantrum had just sort of left Battle Royale upside down the first time.
That's an even more underwhelming fight than the one we got, though.
Yeah, but it's an underwhelming fight that wastes less of my time.
Yeah, but if it's not a 3-minute fight, we get 2 minutes of filler from somewhere else, don't we? Although the filler we've had has been pretty high quality, so maybe that's not a bad thing. In Robot Wars, it would definitely be a bad thing.
No, I think I'd be willing to take that trade in this series of Battlebots anyway. But you know, it was fine.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I'm going to regret that soon, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know. It was fine. What could you do about it other than completely replace the fight with a different one?
What's the point? What would they do in that situation? Because we know that the episodes we've had have pretty much been one filming session per episode. They put these fight cards together as a sort of live show in the same sense that they are in the episodes. But they have shuffled a couple of things around. So I don't know how far they're willing to shuffle things in order to make better episodes.
I mean, so if I were like planning and organising one of these things, I would probably put the robots that are more likely to be sketchy like this and sort of try and get them recorded earlier in the day, so that if they had a really naff fight that lasted 3 seconds and you wanted to sort of do it, you can sort of say to those things, right, take the day to sort of like figure out why your spinner isn't working and stuff, and then we'll redo that fight at the end of the recording session, and then we can televise the better of the two, maybe, because they've already sort of like, this whole thing is sort of already done away with competition stuff. So I think it's reasonable somewhat to redo fights, maybe if they're particularly bad, but perhaps not.
But okay, so let's go with that situation. Let's say that this fight is fought as it was originally. Tantrum flips Battle Royale with Cheese and leaves them there. Producers say, okay, that fight was a bit terrible. Go away, we're going to redo this tomorrow. Battle Royale with cheese obliterates Tantrum. Then we've got some major controversy on our hands. And this is reminiscent to something that I believe happened back in the early days of Robot Wars, where I think it was a Stinger fight. I don't know who it was against. They did the fight, they recorded it, they went, hey, that was terrible, can we redo it? But we're going to make sure that Stinger still wins. And both of those solutions seem very wrong to me. Because you're either fixing a fight or giving a team a mulligan on having lost. And yes, these are curated fights. We've kind of done away with a knockout format, but at the same time, they do count for something. And I feel like if this was something like Tombstone Minotaur, where that situation arose, I don't think anyone would be happy with that because they feel like it's going to affect the final standings. I think the only reason you would even suggest that with these robots is that you don't think they're going to make it.
I think if Tombstone and Minotaur had a lame fight that was like 3 minutes where neither weapon worked and they just did a bashy, I don't know. It's sort of like the whole way that this series is structured sort of makes me view it as an entertainment show, like a variety show type thing, more than a competition. So I think I'm much more comfortable with the idea of getting entertaining fights out of it, and if you get rubbish fights, then redoing them. But I can sort of, obviously this does have an impact on things in the future as well. I mean, there is still a competition at the end of the day, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is.
I think for me, what you've suggested there is crossing the line. I really like what they've done with this season. I love what they've done this season. Every matchup they've given us so far has been good in its own way. So this, as a sort of meme, as you say, good matchup. All the other ones, I mean, there's a load on here where I've got notes about why it's a good matchup, why it's interesting. And they've done amazingly with that. And they're giving us the fights we want to see, but in a situation or in a setup where they can still give us a fair result. We don't know whether they will give us a fair result. That's going to be very interesting when the time comes to select the 16 and whether most fans agree with it. But so far, we have to assume that they're going to do a good job selecting the correct 16 competitively.
Yeah.
Whereas if we start redoing fights just because they weren't very good for TV, that's where I think we hit issues of, you know what? The programme is getting in the way of the competition.
Yep.
Right now, what we've got is the best of both worlds. It might not turn out that way, but so far it feels like it is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I agree with you.
I think so too.
Yeah. Yeah, don't redo fights. That's a silly idea, Sam. Why did you even suggest it?
There's nothing else to say about the fight, is there? Apart from, thanks for putting them back over. It was the right idea. Didn't necessarily make it any better. I will say, I'm excited to see Tantrum in a different style of fight, because I do think it's going to hold its own.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Well, then, you'll have to see it then, won't you?
I will.
Is there a specific reason that you're sceptical about Tantrum?
Just to be sceptical, because you're not. Basically.
Manufacturing controversy.
I would never do that. I would never arbitrarily take an opposing side of an argument.
No, we wouldn't double down on a bad argument just to create discussion. It's not the way we work.
Yeah, but it's annoying when you do it.
It's glorious when I do it. What is next, Sam? Enlighten us.
Have Lockjaw versus Endgame. Endgame.
I want you to revoice a movie trailer in that voice.
No, that would be bad. In a word. No.
So we've got pit neighbours up against each other here.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought that was interesting.
I don't know why you thought that was interesting.
And now I've said it, I'm struggling to justify it.
Isn't that interesting?
These guys, 5 years ago, shared a Coke. Isn't that fascinating? If it was some Coke, then it'd be interesting. I don't know where I'm going with any of this. Endgame versus Lockjaw. Good fight. Controversial fight.
Endgame have fixed their ground clearance issues, and Lockjaw haven't. I think is what's happened here.
Well, Lockjaw never had a ground clearance issue.
Well, they had one in this fight.
They had a clipping issue in this fight.
Too low.
You know, I think there is a reason why I brought up the whole pit neighbours thing, because I think this is a fight with a couple of good examples of sportsmanship, when later on we're going to get examples of sportsmanship that I don't think are examples of sportsmanship.
Brilliant. It's a great sentence.
It's definitely that. It's an idea expressed between a capital letter and a full stop. So as you say, Lockjaw quite quickly got stuck. I feel like Endgame could have completely thrashed them at that point, but after going in for one hit, held off.
Yeah, they did go in for that hit. They did take off a wheel doing it.
No, they didn't take a wheel off while they were stuck. They took the wheel off afterwards.
Afterwards, okay.
I mean, they probably
misremembering.
loosened one.
Yeah.
But no, they went in for one hit, and they then seemed to back off and let him get free. Because when I first saw this fight, I assumed that Endgame were having more drive trouble. But on second and third viewing, I think they were genuinely holding back. Because once Lockjaw had lost the wheel and was struggling to move around anyway, again, I feel like they could have gone in and really finished him, but didn't.
Yeah, they took as much advantage as they needed to win the fight, but yeah, they didn't go too far really. Yeah, it was they trod that line very well.
Yeah, they knew they had it won. They knew how much damage they could potentially do and decided not to do it.
Because there were a couple of times actually when like Lockjaw wasn't moving very much, and then Endgame weren't doing anything, and then Lockjaw did start to move again, and it was only then that they went back in just to sort of like really sort of be like, stay down kind of thing.
It was more of a threat than an attack, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just, we could.
Yeah, we're still working.
This big spinny thing, it's still a big spinny thing.
Yeah.
I still can't like this version of Lockjaw.
It's lost everything for me.
I do wonder if the flipper grabber would have been a better tactical choice for this fight, because they do seem to have it in the pits. I wonder if that would have been better for this fight, purely to sort of capitalise on the lack of manoeuvrability that is inherent within a vertical spinner.
Yeah, maybe.
It also might have stopped them getting stuck under the saws. But that's very much hindsight being 2020, that one.
Yeah, I wonder if, I feel like the grappling setup and flipper and stuff, it wouldn't have reduced their chances of winning, I don't think. I think at worst case it would have made no difference to the outcome of this fight.
They keep saying that Endgame can't self-right. I'm fairly sure that's not the case. But surely if you have a flipper option against a robot like that, you try it out.
Well, you want to do it just to make them use up all their kinetic energy on the floor, if nothing else.
And Donald is the kind of driver who could really capitalise on one good flip, getting them slowed down to really do some damage, really take control.
Yeah.
That is his kind of robot for a lot of his career. Okay, he has had some other stuff, but he's mostly been a control bot guy, which I think is why I'm so disappointed that he's gone down the spinner route.
Yeah, well,
He's
tried something new and it hasn't worked. It's a shame.
And of course, I hate it when people try new stuff that's unsuccessful. It's my least favourite thing. I would never defend anyone that did that.
Well,
it's not in my nature.
Like the thing, right? I know you're sort of making a bit of a joke, but like normally when you defend a stupid idea or like a thing that doesn't work very well, it's like it is at the very least a unique idea that doesn't work very well. Whereas this is like it's new for or reasonably new for him, but it's still like you're just going for a drum spinner.
Yeah, I mean, if Huge had got absolutely decimated in its first fight, I'd be defending it.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming to my aid there. That is a rare moment of unity. Endgame still looks really strong offensively. No idea if it can take a hit. No idea if they're even going to have to take a hit the way they're doing at the moment.
Yeah.
Although that said, I think if Lockjaw hadn't got stuck under the saws there, they were on a good charge towards their side. So maybe that would have been the test of their robustness that we needed.
We'll never know. We just need to wait for Endgame to have their dream come true and then go and fight Tombstone.
I was thinking we could go for someone a little softer first, but...
No. Skip straight to the end game. Whoa.
Okay, then let's move on to tonight's main event. A fight guaranteed to go the distance. Tombstone versus Gigabyte.
Oh boy.
Two very conservative robots, very defensive-minded. It really could go either way. I say that. The second part of that isn't really a joke. I really did think this could go either way. You've got Tombstone, who've had to make some big repairs following the Minotaur fight. Gigabyte is a fresh new build, but based on a tried-and-true design. As a design, I think it's a pretty good shot at beating Tombstone. It's got that chance to ride under the bar, get some hits on the frame. The fact that they're anti-clockwise and Tombstone is clockwise makes it really hard for Tombstone to actually do that much damage to them. They had lots of things in their favour, and then suddenly no things in their favour.
Well, so like from my understanding, like there's nothing like wrong with the way they designed or built that robot. I think my understanding is that they basically got a part from China that was not what it claimed to be, and that's what let them down. Um,
A very important part.
the most important part in many respects, which is a shame. Because like I mean, assuming Gigabyte didn't have that fatal flaw there, I think it could very easily have gone the whole way. It would have been it's a really good design against Tombstone, I think.
I must say, I don't know completely how Gigabyte is constructed and how it works, but I do wonder if, with the mast on, that failure couldn't have happened. I feel like if nothing else, it'd be far less likely because it'd have to work its way up the mast and along the bent part before coming off.
Well, I mean, either way, once it was sort of dislodged, I think they would have. I don't know.
Their offensive capability would have been lost.
I mean, if you imagine it got stuck halfway up there, or like it visibly like lifted off the body, up the mast thing, and then came back down. I suspect, I could be wrong. I don't know, but I suspect that the Gigabyte team would still be like, we're done. I still think they wouldn't want to carry on.
Well, they still have armour, essentially, wouldn't they? That's the thing.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I really don't know.
I think this was my favourite fight to watch live for one very simple reason, and that is the chat I was having at the time about what I was watching. I had just enough time to type, "That shell looks loose," and hit enter before it flew off. So I was like, hey, that shell looks loose. Oh, it's gone.
Boom, yeah. What do you think about the rules around tapping out then? Do you think a team should be allowed to forfeit in a situation like that and go, like, because they sort of tried to sort of say, no, we're done, we want this fight over, and they were sort of like, no, you've got to carry on. And I think it's a silly rule to make them do that, because teams can just do what they did, which is just stop moving and trust that the people that you're fighting, who you presumably know very well, get on with and stuff, are not going to do the properly terrible thing and hit them anyway.
So tap outs are quite a common rule, especially in the lighter weight classes, because when people go along to a live event, they're doing it very much as hobbyists, and you don't want to be sitting there helpless as someone completely destroys all the most important parts of your machine. So I can completely understand why that is in place in a lot of competitions. Battlebots, however, is a TV show, and if you have teams tapping out as soon as they lose one side of drive, which is something you often see in live events, you're kind of losing a lot of your fight. And for TV, you can't really let that happen. So I understand why Battlebots doesn't have that there. The second reason that I would usually give for Battlebots not having it is that Battlebots usually offers build stipends. So, they are throwing money at competitors, and at that point they may feel, well, we've kind of funded the destruction of your robot. But for this series, my understanding is that there haven't been any build stipends. So with that being the case, I think it does slightly weaken that argument. I still think it's right not to have tap-outs as a TV show, but I think relying on the goodwill of competitors not to do something horrible is a slightly dodgy position, especially given that the producers would probably benefit more from Tombstone going in and obliterating Gigabyte than they did from Ray being a normal human being about it.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine the traction you could get out of putting those clips out.
Yeah.
Of a completely defenseless robot just getting absolutely huge fixed. And yes, it's a shame to lose Gigabyte from the rest of the tournament, but that one moment, that's a big moment.
That would give me such mixed feelings, because I think there'd be a split second of just pure joy watching that get utterly annihilated, followed by just a crushing sense of just sort of guilt at finding that enjoyable, and just kind of feeling sorry for the Gigabyte team, and then being like, man, that's a horrible thing that Ray just did. So yeah, I guess I'm glad that he didn't do it. As amazing as that split second would have been, I think the long-term impacts of doing that would be horrific. And he didn't do it, which is good.
I will freely admit that, being the flawed human I am, I was sat there internally screaming at Ray to do it.
Yeah, I was.
As I was watching it live, I wanted him to do it.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed when he didn't. But then, of course, the red mist goes away, and it was completely right not to do it. If this was something like King of Bots, I'd say that morally you're completely allowed to do it. where that robot has been completely funded. At that point, I'm kind of thinking, yeah, maybe it's okay. But here, no, he did the right thing.
I think even in that situation where the robot's been entirely funded by someone else, I still think it's hard to justify utterly destroying someone's robot, because it's not just money that's gone into doing it. It's a lot of time and care and attention and energy that's gone into it. And I just think even if someone else had paid for it, knowing that all of that time has just been wiped out in one hit, in one fight. I mean, this is Gigabyte's first fight, and it would end their tournament. And I think that would really suck, even if someone else had paid for it.
I completely agree with that. And the only defense I can give to it is that when you go to a top-level tournament like this, where you know there is no tap-out rule, I think you do have to accept that is a possibility.
Yeah.
I still think I don't think many teams, if any teams, would do it, because obviously you've got to think about your standing within the community, and a lot of people would be angry at you if you did. But King of Bots is a specific situation where I kind of go, if it's going to happen anywhere, that's where I would be most okay with it.
Fair enough.
This kind of brings us back to my sportsmanship planned rant, essentially, which is that I find it really weird that people say this was good sportsmanship from Ray. To me, good sportsmanship is doing something you don't have to. So it's going in and flipping an opponent that have got stuck at the start of a fight. It's not hitting a dead opponent. To me, that's just more within the realm of common decency. And people seem to think that because Ray was technically allowed to hit them, him not doing that should somehow be plus points to him, when actually, to me, it's more, if he did do it, it's minus points. Not doing it, that's just neutral points.
Yeah.
Those weren't coherent sentences, but I hope the idea makes sense.
I think I get what you're driving at. I think it's just much easier to think of things in terms of good sportsmanship and bad sportsmanship, and not have that kind of neutral area in the middle. In which case, I think what Ray did is good sportsmanship, because it's not bad sportsmanship.
Let's not stretch ourselves to acknowledge a grey area.
Yeah, we've got everything's got to be binary. Humans, they love the binary extremes.
I just love that I'm here arguing for grey areas. It's not something that happens very often.
You want nuance and subtlety.
It is a disappointing main event, let's be honest. It's a disappointing tombstone fight, because nothing really got broken.
Apart from Gigabyte. I enjoyed it, though. Like, it wasn't the best fight in the world, but I did enjoy watching it. I think Ray is a fantastic TV villain, actually. He's
amazing.
His, like, I haven't really appreciated this before, that he does a really good job of being that TV villain and that personality and stuff. I think he adds a lot. So I just think, and he could do that a lot here and stuff. So it was, I don't know. It was good. I enjoyed watching it.
At first, I felt like not going in for that hit potentially hurt his villain status. But actually, it's kind of enhanced it. It's sort of, I'd let you live this time.
Yeah.
I had your life in my hand. And I chose to be merciful so you could go and tell your story.
Yeah. It's that sort of like...
Even though the story wasn't Tombstone broke us, the story was dodgy manufacturing broke us.
And we got some more of his maniacal laugh. So, that's always good.
Oh, that's all we want. I always love a Ray Billings interview as well, actually, because he's always just so happy.
Yeah.
He just loves being there.
Yeah, I think he genuinely does, and I think I do think he's just good on television, to be honest. At least in this context.
I can't wait for 4 or 5 seasons' time where he just decides to be a good guy instead. Just becomes this cuddly, lovable fellow. Just brings a little 4-bar lifter with him or something.
Oh man. Comes in with a Deator.
Just goes full Rex Garrett and refuses to damage anything.
Maybe he will come in with the infamous foam robot.
Yes.
I would love that.
I mean, even if he just comes in with the ultimate spinner killer wedge. I mean, he does have Swamp Thing. That's literally just a wedge with a flamethrower.
Yeah.
He has previous on this.
Well, do it.
Oh, the ultimate use for Ray. If we reach a point where he's won sort of 5 seasons back to back, just get a house robot him and let him drive it.
I mean, the house robots would win everything, surely.
Well, no, he'd have rules to follow. He'd just go in on after something was dead, pick it up, parade it around. He'd love it.
Yeah.
Or go really old school and just have a massive screen. You know, the massive screen they already have, and just have his disembodied head cackling at people. Like full Games Master / Holly from Red Dwarf.
That would be funny. I'd like that.
I'm now just being reminded of the moment in Series 10 of Robot Wars where Will Thomas's face came up on screen like that. I've lost the plot. It's great.
It's too far gone. Right then.
On to episode 5, and another excellent intro featuring Huge. Because anything to do with Huge is fine by me.
Yes, well, it was a staring contest. It was quite funny.
I notice you haven't yet reached the point where you're skipping everything that isn't fights. Do you reckon that point will come this season?
I skipped a little bit in this episode because I was in a hurry. Because I was in a hurry to watch it. I only had my lunch break to revise episode 4 and then watch episode 5. So I had to watch.
Was that the first time you'd watched it?
It was yeah. I'd never got round to it in the week. I should have done. It's just poor planning on my part.
I just want to point out that I've been away this weekend for a very intense weekend of camping with the 7-year-old. Their first time camping. It was hot. It was insecty. I'm covered in bites. I eventually got back about, 8 o'clock on Sunday. First thing I did was watch Battlebots. Couldn't rest until I had.
This conversation is a prime example of why I don't ever want you to tell me if you're wearing clothes or not. Because when you tell me that you're covered in bites, in my head is just a butt-naked version of you covered in bites. It's infuriating. This is why you shouldn't tell me this stuff.
If it helps, they're all on traditionally unclothed areas of my body.
The image is there. It's in my head, and now it's hopefully in the audience's head as well. I'm going to share the pain.
Implying that you won't edit this out.
I have no plans to edit it out.
You don't really want to edit this thing at all, do you?
I want the audience to have an image of you slumped on your bed with your shirt off and a chest covered in insect bites.
Some of the insects still attached. Just a mess of ticks and mosquitoes.
Oh God.
No, I'm in a lot of discomfort, but I'm pushing through, and I made sure that when I didn't even shower before watching Battlebots. That's how much I needed to see it. It was painful to me that I hadn't yet seen it. And in fact, I've just realised that I don't think I've caught up on This Is Fighting Robots either. Oh no, I did it afterwards. That's fine. Phew. See, these things matter to me far more than they should, to the point where it's a medical condition.
Well,
you laugh like I'm joking.
I don't think you are joking. I've got a life outside of BattleBots.
Well, that is your mistake, not mine.
Yes.
Shall we get into the first fight?
Yes.
I'll allow you to introduce it.
Have free shipping versus Huge.
Huge.
Huge!
Good man.
That is a lot of fun to do, I have to say.
This is a battle of two robots that I just love. Unconditionally.
This was a great fight.
It really was. Completely one-sided and yet still excellent. Free shipping is just a mess of things that Huge can break. And yet the basis of it, that drivetrain, that chassis, is just fast, reliable, exceptionally well driven. And as much as it was hard coming into this fight to see it winning, you could absolutely see it surviving.
Yeah, I mean, when I was sort of like, my first note for this is, what even is this fight? Surely Huge will win. Sort of like this is a ridiculous matchup. But yeah, in hindsight, it makes sense.
Good additions from free shipping, really. The little teeth on the forks. They've got a strategy there, one that could reasonably work. It's just kind of messed up when one of the forks immediately gets bent through 90 degrees by a single hit.
Yes, and then they lose the entire lifting mechanism shortly afterwards.
I alluded earlier to Huge's bar being quite light and therefore not carrying as much energy as it could. Definitely carries enough.
Is it enough? Is it ever enough?
It's never enough.
Is there ever enough energy in a spinning weapon? No, there isn't.
Well, apparently Helichopper was too much.
Well, I mean, that's production's fault. I mean, that's not that Helichopper's got too much energy. That's that the arena is not tough enough. That's the problem there.
I would rather they just emptied the audience for all of Helichopper's fights and had the Roboteers operate remotely, as in from a different room via TV feed, and had it in than reject it. It's just a loss to everyone.
Yeah. That would be good.
Moment silence.
I noticed in this fight that Huge seems to have fixed its traction issue between its drive belt and its wheels, because Huge is constantly wheel spinning on the floor in this fight.
Funnily enough, there was a point very late in the fight where I think they lost drive on one side, and the only reason I could tell is that they weren't wheel spinning.
So yeah, Huge, once again, you need to put like just a bike tire, just chop up a bike tire into sections and staple it on. Solve these problems.
They had an AMA earlier in the week.
Ooh.
And they confirmed what I thought all along, which is they simply don't have the weight to add rubber to those wheels. It'll be a lot of rubber.
Yeah. Yeah, it would.
And also, it seems to work just fine. They've had 2 dominant victories where they've done huge damage to an opponent. Oh, that wasn't even intentional. Where they've done lots of damage to an opponent.
Yeah, but like they've done huge damage because the opponent keeps attacking them. It's not as if Huge.
Well, yeah. What else is the opponent supposed to do?
Well, I don't know. Like I feel like they could. I just want them to be more effective as ever. I just want a more competitive version of Huge. So.
Huge is very much a swing your fist and it's their fault if they get hit robot. It's just a thing of beauty. Some interesting commentary, though, where Kenny claimed that the wheels were bending because of the fire, despite the fact that we saw last time they fight, they always bend like that. That's just what they do.
It did look like they were sort of beginning to buckle a little bit under the weight of their own robot. No. Do you not think? I think those wheels were a bit softer, but you know.
I think what tends to happen with Huge is that if it's going to land on a single wheel, it's going to land in such a way that it bends it in underneath the robot. And over time, some of that bend has to remain. You know, it's not always going to spring back perfectly to how it was. It's going to get slightly bent in over time. And I imagine that these are the same wheels they face Sub-Zero with.
Okay.
So that damage has to build up over time. They've got to be able to make new ones very easily. It's not a particularly big job. Just cut some holes in some plastic. UHMWP, that's the one. I feel like they're very happy for the wheels to be disposable in that way.
Yeah.
I suppose the one thing we can really say for free shipping is that it's incredibly aggressive and incredibly on fire.
It is remarkably on fire and multicoloured fire and sparks.
There were sparks from free shipping, other than the ones caused by it being hit repeatedly.
I think its internals were beginning to spark and short out. Yeah, I think I saw electrical arcing happening under that robot.
Ah, would that be after the flames had got turned back on the robot by any chance?
It was quite near the end of the fight, so at this point I have to imagine that basically all the insulation on their wires in that box up top were basically melted at that point.
Everything seemed pretty melted in the little sequence we got later in the show of them getting back in the pits and it just being black.
Yeah. So I suspect it was at that point they sort of like lost a lot of the insulation on a lot of their electronics, and yeah, I think things were arcing in there.
I mean, they should have some serious damage. If that flame is actually a viable weapon, you'd hope that a minute to a minute and a half of it constantly being aimed at themselves would do some damage. If it doesn't, there's a big problem there.
It's pretty naff.
Although again, that is a flamethrower that is largely for show. You know, any yellow or orange flames are more for show than they are for damage, really. If you're serious about doing something to an opponent, you've got a proper blue blowtorch flame.
I don't know what else to say about this fight, other than it was really enjoyable.
There's one very big thing to mention, and that is the fact this is somehow a split decision. And I do not understand at all how that is the case.
Yeah, that is a good point. Why was that a split decision?
I think it is impossible. If you're judging correctly, it is impossible to give this to free shipping. Both damage points have to go to Huge. Free shipping did no damage to Huge whatsoever. Huge didn't even do damage to itself. Aggression has to go to Huge because they're the one with a working weapon in the first place. After that, even if you give control and strategy to free shipping, which you probably should, they still can't win. Frank, what are you doing, you mug? How are you giving this to free shipping?
Is that... one of these days I will correctly internalise what all of these rules mean and how they're judged. But today is not that day. Is that what aggression is? Just having an active weapon that does damage? Is it?
In Battlebots, active weapon is defined as... in Battlebots, aggression is defined as the use of your weapons.
And is it in
It used to be primary weapon.
Yeah.
Now it's just weapons. In Robot Wars, that's not how it is. Aggression is a more general term.
So I guess then by Robot Wars versions of these rules, it would be you'd give aggression to free shipping, because like Huge
Yeah.
were just being charged at and doing damage by virtue of having a massive spinner, whereas free shipping were actually being the aggressors in that fight, I would argue. Okay,
Yeah.
that would explain
But
my confusion.
without
there.
a working weapon for most of the fight, they can't be classed as aggressive.
No, yeah, that makes sense to me now.
I quite like this aggression rule in a sense, but it does make it harder for good wedges to occasionally upset a spinner.
Well, I mean,
Although when we have it the other way around, we end up with Cherub beating PP3D, so we can't really win.
you just want to be the judge of all things.
Happily, yeah, I will take on that responsibility. I think I would do a very good job as a demigod.
Very inconsistent job, that's what you do.
Like the real gods.
Let's not go there.
That is fair. The other big talking point of this episode is Kenny doing the interviews on the sidelines, demonstrating precisely how unnecessary it is to have a different person for that job.
Yeah, that was a bit of that was funny, wasn't it? It's just like, is that because, what's her name, Jessica, is that because she genuinely wasn't there, or was production experimenting with more ways to cut production costs?
I must say, as soon as Chris said that Jessica was absent and there was a replacement, I was fully expecting Grant Imahara. Because I can't not expect Grant Imahara on a Discovery program about robots.
Yeah.
I thought Kenny did really well.
Yeah, I
think he's the best interviewer we've had so far.
They don't need anyone else there.
He's so used to being interviewed in these situations that he knows how to do it. Keep him.
I would make the argument that you don't even need Farouk, obviously. I reckon you could do it with
But
just...
you want Farouk.
You could do it with just Kenny and Chris, and I think it would still be entertaining. Although, I say that, Sliceberg, so, maybe Farouk is worth having after all.
Farouk has had a couple of moments here. I agree that you could have a good show without Farouk, but I think what Farouk does, no one else could do. So to drop him, you've got to drop that part of the show.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be worthwhile. If we still had a really fluff, storyline-driven version of Battlebots that we had from ABC, I would maybe say, you know what? Let's get rid of any fluff we can, even if it has to be Farouk. But now he's the only fluff that's left. I value him.
Some fluff good, lots of fluff bad.
Carefully selected fluff is fine.
No,
some may even say desirable.
Some fluff.
Just imagine a world without fluff. It would be coarse and rough and irritating. It would get everywhere.
Oh.
I tried to coax you with that one earlier. That's the best thing. And you wouldn't rise to it. And I've still got it in there. Minotaur versus Hypothermia, then.
Yes. Minotaur versus Hypothermia.
It's a drum versus a tank, and it's another great matchup.
Yeah. Well,
I sense potential disagreement from you.
Is Hypothermia a tank? Is it? I mean,
on the evidence of this fight, yes. And just by virtue of being a fuzzy machine, probably yes. I would always expect a machine that he brings to not necessarily be the most destructive, but to be incredibly robust.
Yeah, maybe this is just, I just don't understand. I don't understand how robots work, I guess. But like having exposed drive motors seemed like a bad idea. Not that it mattered a great deal in this fight.
Does it have exposed drive motors?
I think it does, yeah. You can see what looks very much like motors in front of the wheels. Maybe are they not drive? Are they for something else?
I think they might be for the grabbing arms, although I'd need to take a look at an image.
Yeah, I don't
which
know.
I will do now.
So there's the most likely explanation for my feelings here is that I have no idea what I'm on about.
I think that's the best explanation for most things we say, really. The existence of this podcast is kind of predicated on us not knowing what we're talking about. Just trying to get a good up-close image of what we're talking about here, but internet and laptops get in the way. Talk among yourselves.
How does the internet prevent you or get in the way of you looking something up on the internet?
Well, it's a bit slow sometimes, Looking at it, yeah, they're definitely the motors for the grabber system.
Okay.
The drive motors will be larger than that and in that back section.
Okay.
I must say, just look at this photo has reminded me, actually. I'm very surprised that they opted for redundancy on the wheels over a more robust plough. That seems like a strange bit of prioritising to me going into this fight, although it did kind of work.
I think it makes, if you look at like how Minotaur wins a lot of fights, it's not uncommon for Minotaur to start taking wheels off. So it's like, well, let's add more wheels. I think that makes sense.
Although it usually only removes small wheels. Doesn't do so well against big wheels. There's a lot of rubber there for it to not get a good bite on.
That's true.
And I can't help feeling as well that the way they doubled up the wheels, it looks to me like if you take one, you take both anyway. Whereas a nice big armoured front end, which you can keep pointed at them, to me seems like the more useful thing. Although, of course, you know you're going to get flipped quite a lot as well, so maybe relying on a front end isn't quite the right approach against Minotaur.
I mean, I don't really know what the right approach against Minotaur is. You know, what do you do in that situation?
Have you seen the solution that Bronco have brought for drums?
Is that a big skirt thing or something else entirely this time?
Wait till you see it. It's good. I like it. I don't know if it will work, but I like it.
Okay, fair enough.
We'll let that one hang until it comes up, if it comes up.
Perfect. Well,
But that flimsy scoop got bent up immediately and did them no favours.
Yeah. That didn't work in their favour.
Oh, something I've just remembered, actually. Minotaur looked quite new and shiny in this fight, didn't it?
Did it? I think the drum still looked quite beat up. I wouldn't have
The
described
drum
it.
did, but everything else looked brand new because everything had been broken by Tombstone.
They've also got a feeder wedge on it.
They've got a ground scraping bar,
Look,
for
the
ground
guy
clearance.
described it as a feeder wedge.
What does he know? It's not like he literally wrote a whole intensive technical manual on robot building. Everyone knows that I am the true arbiter of words. I will decide what isn't anything.
Oh, man.
I still maintain it doesn't do any feeding.
Okay.
Wedge, however, I'll grant.
Qualifies as a wedge, does it?
It does, yes.
Okay.
To the layperson, it can be a feeder wedge, but to us true connoisseurs, I think we have to keep it as an open question at the very least.
It's a feeder wedge.
It's a wedge. You will not win. The comments will win. The comments will crucify me. I'm fine with it.
So, moving on.
There isn't much to say about this fight. It's a really good fight despite not being a contest.
I mean, it was a classic sort of fight for Minotaur of just a battle of attrition and just sort of like slowly but surely taking more and more and stuff off hypothermia. And towards the end, we got some more sparks from electronics from hypothermia.
Mm-hmm.
That was exciting to see.
It's very reminiscent of the old blacksmith fight, except hypothermia didn't burst into flames at any point.
No. That would have been cool if it did, though.
It would have been surprising, given that it doesn't have a flamethrower on board.
That'd make it even cooler.
It would, to be fair. So yeah, technically a judge's decision for Minotaur.
Yeah.
Amazingly, not a split decision. Neither Frank nor Derek have decided to go with a really weird choice and just throw points at hypothermia for surviving. Talking of blacksmith, as I was a few sentences ago, in a way that would have been a way better segue if I'd saved it, blacksmith versus the Four Horsemen.
Yes. 3 horsemen of the 4 horsemen are in this fight. Can you explain to idiots like me what the rules are around multi-bot knockouts?
60% by weight must be knocked out for the whole entrance to be knocked out.
So, is somehow one of those spinners and that wedge not 60% of the weight?
That is a good question.
Because that seems
I would imagine
unlikely to me.
if they intended to enter them as a 3, I would expect them to have split the weight in such a way that it was maybe 41, 41, 38. No, that's not maths. 41, 41, 18 or something like that. So that Buttercup plus a spinner would be just under the 60%. But I still don't think they designed this as a 3-part. I think they designed it as a 4-part. So I'm not sure.
Because it did.
And I think we might have had this conversation last time we spoke about them, actually, and come to the same conclusion of, I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know what the intent was. It's the name that's so damn confusing.
I mean, with a robot like Gemini, it's easy. They're 2 identical machines, therefore you need to knock out both. With Crackers and Smasher in Robot Wars, it was the same thing, except they made one slightly heavier, but not heavier enough to be over the percentage it needed to be knocked out. I think in Robot Wars it's 55% potentially instead of 60%, but the idea is the same.
Yeah.
I also want to know what happens if a big chunk of robot gets taken off and therefore changes the weight balance.
Can you imagine winning by knockout because you've removed 60% of the total weight of the robots without disabling any of them?
I mean, it kind of happened to Vanquish.
Just have three shellless robots driving around with no armor and no weapons, and then that being counted as a win.
I mean, I was imagining, like taking a big panel off of a multi-bot. I think you've just gone for full heavyweight there, haven't you? Losing 60% of its mass.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Major ablative armor. That's what you need for that.
It
It could happen to the foam core robot.
Oh dear. Well,
while we're talking about quirks of multibots, I don't like the fact that they describe this as a 3-on-1 battle, because I've seen a lot of sort of more casual viewers who don't necessarily look into the rules and ask sensible questions like you do, who seem to think that these fights are inherently unfair and give the massive advantage to the multibot. So 3-on-1, that's not okay. That's ganging up, even though we know that they still weigh the same and tend to be terrible.
I mean, if you in this fight in particular, like that really highlights the difference in sort of like size and mass of these robots. Like it's so clearly three piddly ass little robots fighting one big robot with a hammer. It's sort of like it really highlights that difference. So I think even if you don't fully grasp the rules there, I would have thought you'd still sort of realise that this is still a fair fight.
I mean, Blacksmith isn't the most compact robot it could be. I think it's got a lot of air gap in there. If you had something like Four Horsemen versus Tantrum, or even Minotaur, I think you'd see that, a heavyweight can be very small. And I think then it would look a bit more unfair.
Mm.
Even though it still would be entirely fair, if not still harsh on the multibot.
Yeah, it was funny in this, just seeing those little spinners just glancing off Blacksmith without doing anything.
I mean, we know that these are quite decent spinners, and they didn't even seem to leave a dent or a scratch even when they got round the back.
It was just like little flies just hitting the thing. It was so funny.
Blacksmith there with that big wedge on the front, just driving through them, not even bothering the weapon, just knowing that they'll fly off in some directions and break themselves.
Yeah.
I found Ian Watts's pre-match interview interesting.
He was a bit confident, wasn't he?
Yeah, he reckoned that the mini-bots would be too quick for Blacksmith, even though they don't look any quicker than Blacksmith is. If anything, I think they look quite slow for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And he then bragged about the armour as if that's got any bearing on the damage that a hammer blow does to you.
His hammer can't hurt us, though, Ryan. His hammer cannot hurt them.
That's like standing there with a frying pan on my head and saying, hit me over the head with the hammer, it won't hurt because I've got metal armour.
Yeah, it was a very bold statement.
From someone who usually is quite reserved. Maybe he was, egged on by producers. Maybe they gave him some sugary snacks to really get him going. Got him hyped.
Maybe they said if you do this piece to camera, we'll let you take all 4 robots in.
And then evidently didn't follow up on that promise.
Yeah, we lied, but we've got the footage now, so sucker.
I still really like the Four Horsemen as a sort of tactical multibot, in that you've got the wedge there and the spinners. The wedge can jam up on opponents so the spinners can get in on the soft bits. There's one fatal flaw in the wedge, and that is that it constantly wheelies.
Mm.
Now, I realise that we have this whole wedge argument hanging in the balance, but one thing that I can definitely say about wedges is that they need to be on the floor.
Do they? They need to be on the floor.
To be effective, yeah.
Okay, an effective wedge. It's an important distinction to make.
You're right, that is actually.
Because I think holding a doorstop in the air and then claiming it's not a wedge anymore is a stupid thing to assert.
Having a wedge of cheese that you put down the wrong way stops it being a wedge of cheese.
Becomes merely a triangle. Does a wedge have to be triangular?
It's not a triangle. It's just not.
Can you have?
It's a triangular prism.
Can you have? Well, does it have to be a Does a wedge have to be a triangular prism? Could you have curved bits on it?
In cross section, it typically would be. I would argue that if it's curved, it's more of a scoop.
What if you imagine, right? You got a wedge that's like a right angle triangle. You're looking at it from the side, and it's a right angle triangle, yeah. And the short side at the back is curved, just for aesthetic reasons. Is that still a wedge?
Wedges are defined by their leading edge, not their rear.
Okay. Well, as ever,
that's just the shape of the back of the robot at that point.
I'm just exploring the boundaries of how you're going to define this.
Explore away. I enjoy this. I don't care if anyone else is listening. I enjoy this.
So if you had it like, so the leading edge was curved inwards, that's different, is it? So
Curved inwards in what respect?
So you've got like you've got your right angle. So from the side profile, you've got your right angle triangle and all that kind of stuff. And then you take the camera and you flip it and you're looking straight down from above, and the leading edge is curved. So it's got like further forwards at the sides and then curves in towards the robot in the middle and then goes back out again in a nice gentle curve.
I see no issue with that.
Still a wedge, okay.
If there's a reasonably consistent gradient going from the floor upwards along the wedge, that's the bit I'm talking about more with it being curved.
Okay.
So something like, so for example, one end of shunt is a scoop. The other end is a plough, which is a sort of degenerate form of wedge.
Okay.
But yeah, scoops, they don't count. Behemoth, scoop, not wedge. Roadblock is a hybrid wedge because it had a kind of scoop on the front and then a wedge.
And then a wedge. What about like the side of Gigabyte?
You see, the fact it's toothed kind of gets in the way of its wedginess immediately. It's not a smooth surface for something to ride up.
If you took the teeth off, just for the sake of just getting a shape in our mind, take the teeth off.
So we now have a truncated cone.
Yeah.
I feel like it has to be defined as a wedge, but I must admit that it doesn't feel like a wedge.
Okay.
This is very much the baguette of the sandwich argument, or the hot dog of the sandwich argument. It's like, once you have rules that are consistent, you have to count it. But it still feels a bit wrong.
Well, I'll let you ponder that a little bit more.
I mean, it's going to consume me for the next week now, so there's going to be a wall of post-it notes.
Like red wool between them all.
I think that may be a reference that's escaped me.
Well, you know, like the classic, like investigating a mystery, you got like the red string that's between, like,
oh,
in a big
red. I
spider's
heard
web.
red wall, not red wool.
Oh, sorry, yeah, mine.
As in Tales of.
Yeah.
Yeah, where on earth were we? Blacksmith wins. Get some good hits in.
Who owns the drone? Whose is that?
That is, I believe, a camera drone.
That's production, is it?
Which we never see the footage from,
Yeah.
except in terribly titled YouTube videos.
Okay, fair enough. That was my suspicion.
The only impact it had on the fight was at one point suppressing Blacksmith's flames once it had already won by sort of hovering down above them and then quickly getting out of the way again.
I really like. I think I probably said this last time we talked about Blacksmith. I really like Blacksmith's hammer, actually.
Oh, it's amazing.
Like, I just find it so funny when it's wailing on another, because it's so fast and so relentless. It's deeply satisfying to watch it just repeatedly hit another robot.
It seems to hit a bit harder than last year as well.
Yeah,
last season.
I think it certainly feels like it's hitting harder. Yeah.
Although it still doesn't actually upset the balance of the robot itself when it hits. So it isn't at those sort of crazy beta or chomp levels of power. It's got that controllable, repeatable power.
Yeah, which I think makes it even more satisfying to watch. I know that seeing like a big, good hit from beta is good, but like something just the relentlessness of Blacksmith just wailing on an opponent, just I find that more satisfying.
To me, they're satisfying in their own different ways. There's a real brutality to a big hit from beta, whereas there's more sort of cruelty to the repeated hits of Blacksmith. And I like both brutality and cruelty.
In all things.
In all their forms. Talking of brutality...
I knew it.
Oh, you know what? I wasn't even going where you think that was going. I was using those to describe Son of Waiachi, not
Why?
Brutus.
Why
What was I
would
doing?
Why would you use those words to describe?
Because I'm not a clever man.
Because you're a fool.
Okay, I'm weak and useless. I should never have had a podcast. Son of Waiachi versus Brutus. You introduce it if you're so good.
We have a brutal robot in Son of Waiachi, and then Brutus.
I am ashamed.
This is a short and somewhat uneventful fight in which Son of Waiachi gets flipped over and then Brutus win.
The main note I have is Son of Waiachi is Son of Waiachi. Big weapon, nothing else. And I feel like where it was once a very dominant machine, people have really worked out how to beat it. And the answer is, have a vertical spinner. Which everyone does, so that's great. Guarantee they get matched up with Lockjaw at some point.
Yeah. Who would win that, though? Like,
Lockjaw should.
Well, should it? Has it shown itself to be that good?
I mean, I don't want it to. I want them both to lose, but
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. I'm sure that matchup will happen, but
they'll bill it as a veterans fight. They might even make it a main event.
that would be a lame main event.
That's what I'm predicting in my head.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a lame main event. It's just one that's likely to be over quite quickly either way.
But, like, predictably over quite quickly.
But you wouldn't... I mean, I'm saying that Lockjaw would win it easily. That's a bit rash, really. I think it would be a difficult one to call. In the same way that Gigabyte Tombstone was a deceptively tricky one to call that happened to be over quickly. I mean, I think most main events will be over quickly, really, because they're going to be the hardest hitting machines coming together. Tombstone Minotaur was very much an anomaly, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's almost by definition the most powerful robots there.
Whereas I think Minotaur Hypothermia would have been a decently satisfying main event, but it isn't one that would be interesting as a billing. The one main event I do see going the distance is Duck versus Tombstone, and that will be an amazing fight that I'm very excited for. Although, based on that, it will be a letdown.
Yeah, that's going to be over in 2 seconds.
As Ray just implodes. It isn't going to be the machine, it's going to be him physically at the controls. He'll just implode with joy at the fact he's getting to fight again.
Oh, dear, yeah.
Dragging ourselves kicking and screaming back to this fight once more, Brutus has finally achieved something that I've wanted to see happen in this kind of matchup for a while, and that's successfully attacking the side of the spinner that's coming at them to get a good uppercut. So many times in fights like this, we see a vertical just go straight at the middle of an opponent's blade and get sideswiped and just be completely wrecked by it. They actually managed to get in at that favourable side and get the uppercut they needed. And you're going to say it was luck.
Did my sniggering give it away?
No, your personality gives it away. My ability to recognise patterns gave it away.
I don't know what you mean. I am entirely unpredictable.
Go on then, what do you make of this fight? Let's have your hardcore analysis.
Well, Brutus got lucky, let's face it. Well, I don't know. I think they did get a bit lucky, to be honest. I think.
Are you unsuccessfully doubling down right now?
Well, I'm sort of like, I think they got a bit lucky, but like beyond that, that's sort of it. That is the thought. I think that's my finish. That's as far as my brain can go with it.
Even if you're going to say they got lucky, you have to accept that they kind of made their own luck with the modifications they made to try and force the weapon to ride over their disc.
What modifications did they make?
So they've put some little sort of armor panels to try and guide any hits up above the disc. They sort of little angled pieces. They've got some little bunny ears either side of the disc as well for protection and to help them run inverted. They're a very robust machine anyway. Yes, they're a spinner, but they're one of the more heavily armoured ones, one of the more compact ones.
I think the other thing about them being a bit lucky is just it wasn't Son of Waiachi almost flipped itself. You know, it was the way that its body caught the floor and stuff that sort of pushed it over.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You know, I feel like I'm just trying to drag out a conversation that I summarised right at the beginning of this, which is it's a short fight that Brutus won by flipping Son of Waiachi. I really don't know what else there is to say about it.
I suppose what you haven't got here is the calibre of hit that we had when Poison Arrow beat Son of Waiachi, where Son of Waiachi was fully up to speed, took that big uppercutting hit and just helicoptered and broke on landing. We haven't really had that. It is a bit more of a cumbersome, over you go kind of ending, isn't it? And they haven't even made any attempt to self-right by trying to spin the body up.
So what good would that do? They've got no way of self-righting.
I feel like you have to try.
Let's try something that I know won't work.
I mean, I wouldn't do that, but that's because I'm risk-averse. I think it's a good win for Brutus.
Yeah, well,
I'm not going to have this luck argument. Their aggression in getting in there and happily taking a couple of hits, stopping them getting spun up to the point where they wouldn't go over, I think you have to give him credit for that.
Yeah, like I'm not saying Brutus were entirely lucky. Like they did the right things in rushing them and stuff. But I don't know, for it to be over so fast, I guess is the bit that I think is a bit lucky.
Fair enough. I'll take that. So let's move on to a fight between a spinner with a kind of 360-degree arc of attack versus a vertical, in which the vertical drives at the oncoming side of the blade, sends him up into the air, but doesn't win. What fight could that be?
Could it be Ice Wave versus Yeti?
No, it's Shredderator versus Endgame. I'm going back a couple of episodes. It's Icewave versus Yeti. Oh, I bet I had everyone go in there. Oh, I'm sneaky.
Quite.
I just immediately regret giving you that piece of audio, essentially. That's just so bad. Let's try and... So Yeti makes a concession to defending by having a plough.
It does, and I feel let down.
I'm let down by the whole fight, if that's any consolation.
Yeah, but like I'm particularly let down by Yeti of all things conceding anything and having armor.
It's the pragmatic choice, and it allows them to be aggressive. That's the way I'm trying to justify it to myself. What I don't like is that they've had to sacrifice weapon to do it. If they just took all the rest of the armor off the robot and put the plough in instead and kept the old drum, then I'd be completely on board.
I'd be
or
fine
if they
with
just went
that.
in on 2 wheels. Screw mobility, we want a plough.
That would be quite
and
funny.
a big weapon.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just not very. Everything else about Yeti is just being the same, basically the same configuration every time, regardless of what they're fighting, and just going ham. And it's just sort of, I don't know. It's just a shame.
I think that works in a knockout competition because they know they've got to get through 4 fights. I completely understand them having the slightly more defensive option.
Yeah, I can understand it. Don't have to like it though.
That's fair. On the other hand, Icewave have gone for their longer bar with the obscured tips. They're also claiming a 300 mile per hour tip speed, which would be against the rules, so I'm not quite sure how they think that's the case.
Yeah, maybe it could,
Unless they've just been allowed to run faster for some reason.
would be no way they'd be allowed to do that. Come on.
There are a lot of rules where it basically says, this is the rule unless you can prove to us that you're competent enough to do this. So on things like pressures and stuff like that, I have seen that. I don't know if that's me remembering the last set of rules, or if it is present in these ones as well. But I feel like tip speed would be one of the places where they wouldn't do that anyway.
Yeah.
It's for things like voltages as well. You can't run over this unless you show that you really know what you're doing.
Yeah, I've seen.
Or you
those
can't
rules,
custom make your own pneumatics unless you really prove you know what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's like 300 miles an hour theoretical, but
toned down for competition.
toned down, yeah.
What are the talking points here? I mean, there are some good hits. The hits seemed to get bigger as the fight went on. The first was a glancing blow to the plough, and that kind of escalated to the final hit where Icewave is flying through the air and Yeti is completely dead.
Yeah, I guess the only other talking point is the accidental hit at the end.
Accidental, you say? Isn't that being a little generous? Where's the cynicism that I've come to know and love?
Sorry, let me try that again. The accidental hit at the end there.
The appalling assault on a defenseless robot that marred the series.
Oh dear.
Some of us are gentlemen, some of us hold back.
That's a rubbish situation for Icewave to be in, but I don't understand why they did anything other than drive straight back at that point.
Yeah, I mean, apparently the whole shot where it looked like they were going to go in on Vanquish was just them driving around to slow the blade. I think that might be what they were going with here, and were just bamboozled by their own cunningness in obscuring the blade tips.
Yeah.
I do feel like Mark, the driver of Icewave, laughing as he apologised, probably did nothing to de-escalate the situation.
Probably didn't help.
So, sorry, I just broke your stuff.
Yeah.
Although,
Thankfully,
yes, he did have a stack of spare wheels, so they could probably afford to lose a couple.
Yeah. Thankfully, it wasn't like the most damaging of hits. It was just like I guess compared to what that robot can do, it was but a scratch on Yeti there. But I don't know. It was funny. I laughed.
It's a good display of Icewave's power as well. The fact it didn't even seem to shrug at just going through those bits of wheel.
Yeah.
That was just routine to that blade. Didn't even slow it down.
Like a knife through butter.
Or, as Jonathan Pierce would say, a knife through hot butter.
Oh God.
Because knives are very good at going through liquids.
Oh, that's more annoying than like the proof is in the pudding. That's
Oh, that. You just found the thing that annoys me most.
I've pressed
The
a button.
arguments I've had with people who refuse to admit that they've got it wrong. Like, the proof of what? Well, the pudding. The proof of the pudding is in itself. Okay, that's technically probably true, but that's not the point. And the problem is, it's mutual friends of mine I've had this argument. Sorry, mutual friends of ours I've had this argument with. People, man. People.
I love stumbling across these buttons every now and then.
Sometimes you just put people on a pedestal, don't you?
Oh, that's painful. That hurts.
So I think that might be my first IT crowd reference. I've done well holding back.
So proud of you.
But as we speak of disappointments, I think this has to go down as another disappointing main event, really. Yeti dying because a receiver stopped working.
Is that what it was?
Apparently, yeah. I'm surprised to hear that they're running a single receiver, given that you can bind multiple receivers to most transmitters. Seems like, redundancy should be the order of the day on such a light and small piece of equipment.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Silly Yeti. How do we conclude this, Sam? What's the big lesson that we've learned today?
Lesson?
I don't know. That's how I'm used to ending things.
The lesson that we've learned is that we shouldn't record when I'm tired.
No. The lesson we've learned is that we must never, ever go away on holidays. For fear of falling behind.
You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episode/32. And there you can find links to all the robots we've been talking about today. You can also find a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us your definition for a wedge.